Alrighty, everyone. This is meteorologist Timmy Albertson here with you guys. Welcome to tonight's weather chat. We got kind of an interesting one. We got two hurricanes out in the Atlantic Ocean. We have Hurricane Lee, which we've been talking about for honestly probably about the past few days now. And we also now have Hurricane Margot. Now, for those of you who remember, a few days ago we were taking a look at the tropics. There was that weak tropical storm whose name was Margot. It's the same one. It's been kind of slowly intensifying over the weekend, and it is now finally a hurricane all the way out in the Atlantic Ocean. So we'll take a little bit of look at that. We're also going to talk a little bit about Hurricane Lee. So Hurricane Lee is going to kind of take up most of the discussion for the day today. But you know, for those of you who might remember, or for those of you who probably realize, today is September 11th, and one thing that I like to do on September 11th is to show what the weather was back on September 11, 2001. Now, for a lot of people in the Midwest and even across New England and up and down the East Coast, you might remember that September 11th had a lot in the way of clear skies. I remember that, of course, growing up in Ohio. I remember that was a very, very clear day. And if we were to actually take a look at the weather map from September 11th, this is what it looked like. There was a very large area of high pressure that was pretty much right over Ohio. Now, this is in the morning here, so this would have been around 7, 8 a.m. in the morning. You also notice that this cold front had pushed through. What some people forget about, especially in New York City, was that the night before, they had quite a bit in the way of thunderstorms. It was a very stormy Monday morning, September 10th, over across much of the Northeast. That cold front then pushed its way off the East Coast by the time we made it into early Tuesday morning, September 11th. And you might notice this little symbol that you see right over here. This was actually Hurricane Aaron. There was a hurricane out across parts of the Northwest Atlantic, and Aaron ended up staying well away from land. And part of the reason for that was because of that cold front that was pushing its way through. So that was the weather. Again, it was very quiet. We had that front that pushed its way through overnight. And again, the night before, September 10th, was a very stormy night across much of the East Coast. And then in the morning, it was very quiet, mostly clear skies out across the entire area. Like I said, I grew up right there in Ohio, that part of Ohio there. And I remember that morning and the rest of the day, very, very clear skies. So it's a little interesting there for you. That's what the weather map looked like 22 years ago. Now, what does it look like today? Kind of ironic. Let's take a little bit of a look. We actually have a frontal boundary that's been pretty much up the East Coast over the past couple of days. If you were watching college football on Saturday, you might have noticed there was quite a few rain delays. Well, part of the reason for that actually happened to be this frontal boundary, which did kind of stall out. And we had these little waves of low pressure that were moving along it, and that was helping to produce a lot of those scattered storms. I think on Saturday when I was showing the list, we had how many games that were in a rain delay, or how many games at least had some storm activity around them on the East Coast. But again, overall, we're not seeing that strong high pressure like we did 22 years ago. As a matter of fact, if we were to take a look at the upper level charts, we actually have this little bit of an upper level trough that is getting ready to swing across the upper Midwest. It actually already is up over the upper Midwest, and that's what's helping to produce a few of those scattered showers and even a few thunderstorms up around where I am near Duluth, Minnesota. But also, this trough is actually going to play an interesting role in the forecast for Hurricane Lee. We're going to come back to that here in a moment. So let's talk about Hurricane Lee here. And what you'll notice about Hurricane Lee, and for those of you who weren't keeping track over the weekend, Hurricane Lee ran into quite a bit of wind shear. So on Friday morning, Hurricane Lee was a Category 5 hurricane with winds of 165 miles an hour. Again, remember, on the Saffir-Simpson scale, that's how we rate hurricanes based on their winds. And Category 5 is the highest category. It needs to have winds of 157 miles an hour or greater. Obviously, 165 mile an hour winds certainly puts it in the Category 5 status. But then it ran into quite a bit of wind shear. And the winds actually dropped down at one point down to estimated about 105 miles an hour over the weekend. So it went from a Category 5 down to a Category 2. Now it is back up to Category 3 status with winds of around 115 miles an hour. Now, earlier on today, it was estimated to have winds of about 120 miles an hour. Hurricane hunters have actually been making their way through the storm, and it appears, especially that on That and on the satellite imagery, it looks like it now has concentric eye walls. And in meteorology, basically, when you have concentric eye walls, you have one eye wall, and then you have another one, within that one, and that's a good indication of what is known as an eye wall replacement cycle. Long track hurricanes, strong winds tend to undergo that at least a couple of times in their life. When that does happen, it does kind of weaken the storm a little bit. Also, kind of helps to expand the wind field just based on the fact you got two eye walls. But the winds, at least at this advisory, at 5 o'clock Eastern time, down to 115 miles an hour. Still puts it, though, within that Category 3 range, albeit kind of right around the kind of in the lower end of the Category 3 range. But it is looking very possible that Lee will try to intensify a little bit more. We'll take a look at the environment that it's dealing with, at least right now and in the near term. But let's talk about that track for a moment here. This is from the National Hurricane Center. Some people probably wonder, why meteorologists always use the Hurricane Center's forecast. The reason for that is because when you're dealing with a hurricane, it's best if everyone is just kind of on a unified forecast with it. So this is the same forecast you're going to see on most news networks and most weather websites as the Hurricane Center's one. So with that in mind, that is the hurricane track. Now, over the next couple of days, it's likely going to be staying as a major hurricane, which is a Category 3 or higher. Looks like it's probably going to maybe intensify overnight tonight and into the day tomorrow to maybe a high-end Category 3 or maybe a low-end Category 4. Either way, it's a strong hurricane. And what's happening here is there's actually a little bit of a ridge of high pressure that is over it. So what we're going to do here really quickly is I'm going to flip over to the map here, and we're going to take a little bit of a look at the environment that Lee is in. So as mentioned, hurricanes are big areas of low pressure, all right? What you see here on this graph is surface pressure, right? Those isobars, the highs and the lows, all right? In this case, there would be a big L right here, and there would be an H all the way up here. Because a hurricane has so low pressure, all right, it can't move a high pressure. High pressures are always the dominant feature in weather, you will come to learn. So Lee has not been able to turn northwards because there's been this high pressure up towards its north, all right? That is also what helped Lee kind of move a little bit quickly over the weekend towards the west there, was rounding the base of this high pressure. And if you remember, the way the air flows around a high pressure, it's clockwise, so that was helping to push Lee over. What's going to happen over the next day or so is this ridge is still going to kind of stay there a little bit, but then it will begin to weaken, and that's going to help open the door for Lee to make a northerly turn. The problem with that is that Lee has been moving pretty quickly over the past couple of days, but as that ridge begins to break down, Lee is going to start to slow down because it doesn't have that extra push helping it along. What does that mean? All right, there's something in meteorology which I don't have a diagram for, but it's called upwelling. And basically, imagine an ocean. Okay, now imagine a lot of waves on that ocean, not little waves, but we're talking big waves. Hurricanes will produce big waves. The ocean temperature is warmest at the top, but when you have those waves and they kind of churn that ocean long enough, it begins to bring the cooler water up. It's called upwelling. Because Lee is probably going to start slowing down as it begins to turn later on in the week, it's probably going to produce some upwelling. So no longer is Lee going to be having these very warm temperatures to work with. Now it's going to start getting some kind of diluted temperatures. Not only that, but if we were to flip over and take a look at I believe I have the temperature map here. I know you see a lot of numbers, okay? Reds are warm. Let's put it for you that way. Water temperature is 90 degrees, all right? This is very warm water, but you notice up to the north, it starts turning orange. Temperatures dropping into the 70s, all right? Those water temperatures are not very conducive for a tropical system. So not only is Lee going to be slowing down, turning up the water, but as it's moving northwards, it's going to start running into cooler water temperatures, which is eventually going to cause it to weaken. Not only that, but it's going to once again run into some wind shear, and we'll take a look at why. Here is why. Now, basically, the map that you see here right below me, this is your highs and your lows, all right? But it's plotting a different pressure level. But regardless, you get the idea. There's that high pressure, there's that low. As Lee begins to turn, you'll notice something, and of course I'm blocking it here, so I'm going to turn off my camera really quickly, but you'll notice right here comes this trough. That's the same trough that we just took a look at that right now is over Minnesota. This trough is eventually going to help weaken that high pressure ridge, all right? And Lee is going to start to move towards it. Now, that trough is going to bring with it wind shear, which is a change of wind over height. If you are a hurricane, you don't want that. Why don't you want that? Because it will tear you apart. Now, it's funny because when we talk about severe storms, we oftentimes talk about the need for wind shear. That's great if you want hail and tornadoes, but if you're a hurricane, you don't necessarily want wind shear because it'll really mess up the dynamic. So as strong as a hurricane is, we talk about how the strongest storms on Earth, just like tornadoes, they're very, very fragile. So Lee is going to start running into cooler water. It's going to start having a little bit of upwelling of its own. And once it meets up with that trough, though, Lee is going to start to speed up. But it's going to get hit with some pretty high wind shear as it does so. And that's likely going to cause it to weaken. So what is Lee going to be doing as it weakens? Well, it's going to be jogging straight to the north, and it's going to be moving pretty quickly. By the time we get towards Saturday, Hurricane Center is expecting it'll probably be off the New England coast. Where will it make a landfall? Well, it's probably going to do that somewhere either in the Canadian Maritimes or maybe around Maine, depending upon whether or not it turns. So, again, still a little far out. Obviously, we're talking about, late Saturday or Sunday when that would happen, but it is looking like at this point that it probably will reach land. But now keep in mind, folks, it's not going to be 115 miles an hour. This storm will be weakening as it makes its way towards the New England coast. Right now, though, it's expected to still be a hurricane, at least by the end of the current forecast. You can see that little H there at the top, in the top of that cone. Again, that is, about, I think they're expecting about 75-mile-an-hour winds by that point, so barely a hurricane. Either way, it's going to be pretty windy. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind here when you look at this forecast cone, all right? This is not where the hurricane conditions are going to be. The cone is where the center could be, and there's a margin of error that goes with that. Now, obviously, you take a look down here, you can see how the hurricane force winds extend outwards from the center, as do the tropical storm force winds. So again, when you think of where the center is going to be by that point, those conditions could, depending upon where in that cone that center is going to be, that's where those conditions are also going to be. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, that is Hurricane Lee. We're going to keep an eye on it, and naturally, as it does get closer to land, we may have some pretty interesting videos of it. But in the meantime, that's just kind of a quick overview of what's happening with Lee. Let's go ahead and take a little bit of a look over at Margot here out in the open waters of the Atlantic. And I'll give you a spoiler, it's probably not going to be quite as exciting as Lee. Part of the reason for that is because it's going to be running into that same high pressure. Actually, that same high pressure is what's been keeping Margot down and kind of made it a little bit hard to intensify. It's kind of moved a little bit out of the way. Margot's now kind of moving up towards the north, but that high still isn't really going anywhere. So that's why Margot really slows down. And you can see all those data points just right up against it. That's part of the reason why. So that is Margot. Margot right now is a Category 1 hurricane, 75-mile-an-hour winds estimated. Now, I say estimated, and there's a reason for that. We'll get to that in a moment, but you can see not moving very quickly, especially once it runs into that high. Again, upwelling and, some other factors playing into that. Margot may get up to a Category 2 hurricane and maybe over the next couple of days. And even if it were to intensify more than that, more than what's expected, ultimately it's going to run into a problem with that high pressure up towards the north. And you can see, folks, it is pretty much mainly out in the open water. So not really going to be doing much unless you're a boat or a fish, or maybe a pilot who, is flying near it. Now, with that in mind, that's Margot's for you there. Now, I should point out that there is another disturbance coming off the West African coast. That one could be interesting to watch. I know on this particular model, and folks, literally, I'm saying this is just one particular model run. Okay, we're not going to take this exactly as is, but there is at least some disturbance that does look like it might emerge off the West African coast later on this week. And then, of course, the model picks it up by about this point, which typically when we're talking about tropical systems that come off the West African coast, typically they start picking up, that tropical storm type of structure, pretty far out, sometimes upwards of about 1,000 miles or so east of the Lesser Antilles. So again, it could be something that might try to form maybe over the weekend or after that. We'll just have to keep an eye. Obviously, what it does afterwards, who knows? These particular models, will have their answer, but they'll change it, later on. But it does look like there may be something moving off the West African coast that may have to, also be watched. All right. So that is the tropics, everyone. Like I said, two hurricanes out there. Now, mind you, folks, this is the time of the year we expect the tropics to be the most active, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One quick thing here we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a look over at the radar. Now, as I mentioned, we have some storms that are working their way across the upper part of the Midwest. Nothing severe with those storms. There have been a few little hail reports with them. But nothing unusual, just given the where the freezing level is right now and everything. I'm not surprised that some of those storms have a little bit of hail in them up around where I am. But again, it's nothing too unusual. So if we're to flip on the radar again, you see some scattered shower and even a couple of thunderstorms up around northern Minnesota, back into Wisconsin. There's some other activity going on too. We actually have ourselves some pretty strong storms down across West Texas, which this is going to be for hail. That's kind of the main thing that's expected today out in this area is going to be some decent sized hail. Now, we were watching yesterday some storms that were a little bit further up towards the north that did end up producing a little bit in the way of hail. The storms that we have right now, at least on the radar signature, are showing some pretty good indications that there may be at least a little bit of hail within them. We start seeing those darker colors here. Obviously, this is not necessarily the most populated part of Texas. So reports will probably be few and far in between. Now, these storms are not necessarily connected to that upper level trough that is swinging through. There's a few other factors kind of going on. As a matter of fact, if we were to flip over back to the upper level chart here, again, you can kind of see that these are more or less riding kind of a little bit on the base of a ridge here, a little disturbance swinging its way through. So not necessarily connected directly to the storms that are happening up across Minnesota, but also not entirely independent. So you get the idea. All right, kind of interesting there. Nonetheless, that is kind of a little bit of a look at what is going on. So that's about it. Oh, I didn't show you some of the Hurricane Hunter stuff. So you can pull this up on Tropical Tidbits. They have this page here. And it is pretty interesting if you're a science nerd like me, who then eventually goes and plots this stuff. When the Hurricane Hunters go through, you pull out the data that they measure and everything from there. They use, and when they do this type of thing, they have instruments, obviously, and they also release what is known as a drop sound. And it's basically, it looks like a tube, effectively, and it's got equipment in it that will measure. And so oftentimes they will drop that as they go into the hurricane, and that helps, with getting a low-level measurement. Obviously, the aircraft can only fly so low, so it does help. But this is just obviously kind of onboard flight data and stuff like that. That they're picking up. I won't go into the details about it, but yes, that is their one of their things. And they fly these routes here. You can see. Obviously, there's the eye wall, at least a little higher up. You can see those colors get a bit brighter. So that was from an earlier reconnaissance mission. Let's see here if they got one. I would not be surprised if they have one. And this is why I say estimated, by the way, when we talk about hurricanes, is that, when they're way out in the ocean, the only thing we really got is satellites. When they start getting a bit closer to land, the hurricane hunters can fly into it. But for the most part, a lot of times it's estimated. Now it has been shown that it's a very, very good estimation. I mean, it's not like they're off by 50 miles an hour or something like that. Maybe a couple miles an hour, but they're very good at estimation. So and again, as I mentioned before, if in a hurricane, the strongest winds are always at the eye wall. The whole thing is not 115 miles an hour. It's just a small portion. And again, those tend to be found right in the strongest. That's where the strongest winds are, is right in that eye wall, especially on the eastern side, or whatever direction it's moving, it'd be on the top part. But you get the idea. So the whole things are not that, but it is interesting nonetheless when they do fly into it. So they'll probably have another mission tonight. Obviously, especially with it now looking like it might be going up to the East Coast, there'll probably be a lot more missions obviously going into it. So yeah, it's Air Force Reserve C1 modified WC-130, I believe, aircraft, and yes, its entire job is to fly right into a hurricane. It's pretty cool. I've always wanted to do it. I actually knew a guy once who did that. He was in the Air Force Reserve, and he was a hurricane hunter. So, anyways, yeah, very interesting. So that's a look, folks, at what's going on right now with tropics. Again, that's what's going on with the weather. So look forward to seeing you guys all back here for the next weather chat. We do these weekday evenings. Again, if you guys have any questions, you can always feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll be more than happy to answer them. I probably should get another poll up. Again, last time I asked it was, what's your favorite type of severe weather? And ironically, everybody said blizzard, which I thought was hilarious because I don't know many people who like blizzards aside from me. But hey, of course, I like most severe weather except for droughts. Droughts are terrible. Heat waves are also pretty bad, but droughts. I wouldn't even consider a drought to be severe weather, but some people do. But it's not. It's the absence of life. Anyways, all right. With that in mind, everyone, I hope you all have a good rest of your evening, and look forward to seeing you back here at the next weather chat tomorrow evening. And again, we'll take more of a look at Lee, and then of course, as we go towards the weekend, as Lee gets closer to land, we'll probably have a lot more updates for you there. So hope you all have a good rest of your evening. Happy Monday, and we'll see you back here for Tuesday evening's weather chat. Take care, everyone.